Okay, so today's daf is Eruvin Daf Hey. We're going to start on Daf Dalet Amud Bet, 6 lines up from the bottom. So, Haya gavoa me-esrim ama, uva le-ma'ato, kama me-ma'et. So we said that in order to you have a situation of a mavoi. The mavoi is an alleyway. It's closed on 3 sides. It's open on the 4th side to the Reshut HaRabim. In order to be able to carry in this alleyway is, of course, again, the passage from multiple chatzerot. You have chatzerot, you have courtyards. Courtyards feed into this alleyway. This alleyway feeds into the Reshut HaRabim. You want to carry in this alleyway. We learned in the first Mishnah that one of the ways that we can permit carrying in a mavoi is if we put a korah, we put a cross beam at the front of the mavoi. The only thing is it has to be within 20 amot. It cannot be more than 20 amot of airspace from the floor of the mavoi to the korah, to the board that goes across. That's what we learned.
Was it ever settled whether it's got to be both a crossbeam and a lechi?
No. That's a machlok between Beit Shammai. That's a machlok between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. So it's settled from our standpoint because we follow Beit Hillel. But
and that's a lechi.
And that's usually it's one or the other.
One or the other.
Yeah. So Beit Shammai. Here we're always dealing with the premise that we're following Beit Hillel. So so the Gemara asked, what if it's more than 20 amot? So can we fix it anyway? Can we get around this problem? So it says, Kama mima'et. How much do we have to lower it if it's 20 amot? So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Kama mima'et. The height of the mavoi can't be 20 amot. Cannot be more than 20.
Can't start it.
Let's say it's 22. So
Let's say it's 20. Why do we have the Kama mima'et, Kama detzarich? Why do we have to lower it?
If it's more than 20, right? If it's gavoa me-esrim ama, it's more. Let's say 21. Okay. So the Gemara is saying, how much do you have to lower it to make it that we can fix it? Because if it's over 20 amot, we can't fix it. We can't put the korah anymore. It's too high.
But it's just to the airspace.
So the Gemara is asking, how much do we have to lower it?
So if it's 21,
Exactly, that's what the Gemara says. Exactly. So the Gemara says, what kind of question is that? Kama ditzarich le, right? You do whatever is necessary. So so it's asking rhetorically. That's why it says it twice. So if he comes to do it, kama mima'et, how much does he lower it? Kama mima'et, kama ditzarich le, whatever you need is what you do. So what it means to say is like this. So we know if it's 21 amot in height. Now obviously all you have to subtract is 1 amah, right? So if it's 21, you have to make it 20. Right. Well, no, or either that, or what it really means is it's thinking of raising the floor. In other words, it's not thinking of lowering the top.
It's 20.
Right. So it's thinking of raising the floor so that there's less space between the floor and the roof. True. So the Gemara is saying, how much of the floor do you have to raise? So ela rochbo bechama. So we know that you have to raise it. Well, let's say 1 amma. The question is, what thickness do you have to raise it? In other words, you have to raise. Let's say you have a mavoi. The mavoi, the length of it is many amot. We don't know what. It doesn't matter. So the question is, how much of that has to be the proper height? Does the entire thing have to be raised? No, the entire thing doesn't have to be raised to less than 20 amot, to make a less than 20 amot airspace. Just the part close to the korah has to be raised.
Like a rim.
So how much of it is the question? So one says, Rav Yosef Amar Tefach. Rav Yosef says only 1 tefach has to be. So even if the tefach right underneath the korah is raised, let's say 1 amah, so there's only 20 amot there, you're okay. However, Abaye Amar Arba'ah. Abaye says there has to be 4 tefachim, so the tefach right under that korah, that cross beam, has to be raised, and the 3 tefachim behind it also have to be raised. So you have an area of 4 tefachim, all of which is raised up. Let's say that 1 amah will only be 20 and will not be more than 20. And in the back here, where we have all these illustrations, it gives us some pictures of what that looks like, so we can envision it. So, for example, where's the case? Okay, actually that's the next case where they dig. Here we go. So we're talking about like this. So he puts a little piece here to make it to lessen the amount between the floor and here.
In the rim. Just a piece.
It could be a ramp, but there still has to be, according to him, there still has to be 4 tefachim.
So one says it has to be 4, it has to go back 4 tefachim into the mavoi. The other one says just a 1 tefach under the korah is enough. That the korah is not more than 20 amot above the floor. That's all that you need.
And we're talking about square area, correct? A square.
Going back, yeah. Going back.
4 square tefachim.
Well, the width we don't know because it depends on the width of the mavoy, but yeah. But so at least going back 4. So now the Gemara says, Abaye Amar Arba'a. So Abaye said 4. So now, Lema Bahakam Palgay. Maybe they're machloket. The question is, what are they really arguing about? What's the basis for the argument? So we could suggest the following. The one that says that all you need is a tefach says that you're allowed to stand and carry right underneath the crossbeam. And how do we envision the crossbeam working? We look at it that the outer edge of the crossbeam comes down like a wall. And so therefore, even if you're directly under the crossbeam, you're within its wall. Because if you think of this is the crossbeam, so the outer edge is coming down. I'm standing under here. The outer edge comes down and seals off the mavoy, so I'm okay. So even if there's only one tefach there that is the required amount, at least there's a space that's sealed off because it's right under the korah, and the korah seals off on the outside. So whatever's directly under the korah is going to be covered. And Uman da Amar Arba'a, and the one that says Abaye, who says that you need Arba'a, you need 4. He says you're not allowed to use the space directly under the korah. Why not? Because it's the inner lip of the korah that closes it off. So it's not enough. So Rashi explains that if we were to make it just the one tefach underneath the korah that is required to be the lower height, if we only fix that one tefach, well, nobody stands under that one tefach anyway. Because nobody's allowed to go in the tefach that's immediately under the korah anyway. So we need to have some space behind that into the alley. That's also the required space. And how much does Abaye say? He says, since we're going to move it up to the next significant measurement that we can use, the next significant measurement after 1 tefach is going to be 4 tefachim. So we're going to say that you need to go back 4 tefachim. Not just the tefach immediately under the korah, but 3 behind it as well into the mavoy are going to have to be raised so that the total airspace between them and the top is 20 or less amot.
Is there some kind of an assumption that the korah extends back?
It's at least 1 tefach. It's 1 tefach only. It doesn't extend back, but it goes down. There's they're envisioning it as being the top, and
I understand that. I understand that.
Yeah.
But if we're saying we got to move back,
no, because he's saying that there has to be an area around. Because what's the reason why it has to be within 20 amot? So people can see it. Right. So there has to be an area near the korah where people are standing within 20 amot of the korah that will see it.
Oh, I get it.
Okay. So since if they can't stand directly under the korah, then you need some space before the korah that they're going to look and notice the korah there before they walk through it. That's the idea. So now the Gemara says no. Alternatively, we could suggest another interpretation. Really, everybody agrees you can stand under the korah. That's not the question. They're arguing about the following. Mar savar korah mishum heker. Omar savar korah mishum mechitza. The real machloket is, how do we understand the function of the crossbeam? Is the crossbeam just a symbolic reminder? Or is the crossbeam actually there as a type of a wall? In other words, that we envision it as closing. So if we envision it as closing, everybody agrees you can stand right under the korah. But if you envision it as closing, so that means that it's creating a wall, and therefore you need a significant space that wall is enclosing. So what is that wall enclosing? Just 1 tefach? That's not enough. It has to be enclosing something of significance. So if it's in other words, according to Rabbi Yosef, that all you need is the tefach right under the korah to be 20 amot or less in height. So no problem. We'll just say that it's just a symbolic thing anyway. So since you're going to stand under that korah, you're going to notice the korah because it's less than 20 amot above you, or it's 20 amot or less above you. So no problem. But according to the one that says no, it's actually a mechitza coming down. It's actually a wall coming down. You need 4 tefachim because that wall coming down has to create an actual space. It has to wall something, and walling just 1 tefach is not walling anything significant. You need to wall at least 4 tefachim. So that's the argument between Rav Yosef and Abaye. That Rav Yosef is saying that the korah is just a symbolic thing, so 1 tefach is enough. And Abaye is saying, no, it's creating a wall, so there has to be a space of at least 4 tefachim that are the requisite height, so that we can say that wall is enclosing at least 4 tefachim of space in the mavoi. So that's the second interpretation. An alternative interpretation is to kulei al makor mishum heker. Maybe everybody agrees actually that the crossbeam is a symbolic thing and it's not meant to create a wall. But the machloket is something else, which is everybody agrees that there's something that the ground. That the crossbeam has to be 1 tefach in width. Everybody agrees it has to be 1 tefach in width. So according to Rav Yosef, the same amount that there has to be above, there has to be below. So since there has to be a tefach above, there has to be a tefach below. But Abaye says, no, we don't say that just like that there's a parallel, that the same dimension of the crossbeam is the dimension that you need on the ground. We say that the dimension that you need on the ground follows its own rule. And since we're not following the rule of the width of the crossbeam, we have to follow our own rule. And what's our own rule going to be? Well, normally a space on the ground of 1 tefach is not significant. So we're going to go with 4 tefachim, which is considered to be a significant space on the ground. Rav Yosef says, just like the crossbeam itself only has to be 1 tefach in width, so too the ground underneath only has to be 1 tefach in width. Abaye says, no, they're two different things. One is the crossbeam width, that's 1 tefach. The other is the space on the ground that is permitted by, or is qualified by the crossbeam. That has its own measurement, which is 4 tefachim. So what we're doing here is proposing different interpretations of this machloket. Everybody agrees what the machloket is. The machloket is that Rabbi Yosef says that only 1 tefach, the tefach immediately underneath the korah, needs to be within 20 amot of the korah's height. And Abaye says that 4 tefachim have to be up to that standard. So, in our case, if you were to have, for instance, a situation where it was a 21 amah tall mavoi, then you would have to fix 4 tefachim in to the mavoi that are only 20. You would have to raise the ground 1 amah for 4 tefachim. So the question is, what is the logic behind the argument? So we're suggesting different types of logic. The first suggestion was that maybe they're arguing about whether you're allowed to stand under it or not. Okay, then the possibility is no, everybody agrees you can stand under it. The question is, do we look at it as creating a wall, in which case you need 4 tefachim that it encloses, or do we look at it just as a symbolic thing? Third possibility, no, everybody agrees it's just a symbolic thing. But the question is, do we determine the ground space that needs to be qualified by the korah by the same standard as the korah itself, 1 tefach, or do they have different standards? So now there's a 4th interpretation here that's going to be offered. Now, finally we can suggest, really everybody agrees all you would need would be a tefach. Really everybody agrees that all you would need was, just like you need a width of a tefach, a hand's breadth for the korah itself, for the crossbeam itself, all you really need underneath it is 1 tefach. The only problem is what they're arguing, what Rav Yosef and Abaye are arguing about, is whether we make a gezerah here, that there's a possibility that if all you raise is 1 tefach worth of the mavoi that is going to be an amah taller than everything else, people are going to walk in and out over many, many times, and what's going to happen? It's going to erode. It's going to waste away. Eventually it's going to erode, and it's going to actually be that there's more than 20 amot between the ground and the cross beam, because you're going to walk so many people. It's a thoroughfare. Remember, this is a public thoroughfare, so people are walking all the time. 1 tefach, it's easy to waste away. So Abaye is not disagreeing in principle with Rav Yosef. They agree on the concept here that all you really need is a tefach of ground underneath the korah that is within the space of 20 amot from the crossbeam. Okay, everybody agrees on that. But the only problem is Abaye is adding that you should really have that for a width of 4 tefachim, just so it won't erode so easily. Okay, that's the reason behind Abaye's argument, and Rav Yosef says we're not concerned about making gezerah here because the whole concept is already rabbinic. We're not going to add another gezerah on to the pile of gezerot that we have here. So he doesn't buy into that gezerah, but everybody agrees that basically what you have here is a cross beam, and the only halacha is that the cross beam cannot be more than 20 amot from the ground underneath it. But all you need is for that one tefach underneath it to be within that height. So now, haya pachot me'asara tefachim v'chakak bo la'ashlimo la'asara kama chokek. So the Gemara then says, let's say you had the opposite problem. Now we know that there's a height maximum for a mavoi. Guess what? There's also a height minimum. The height minimum, like for most things, is 10 tefachim, not 10 amot. So the maximum is 20 amot. Minimum is 10 tefachim, just like a sukkah. Right? 10 tefachim is the minimum height. So now what happens, let's say you have a 9, the mavoi is, remember the mavoi is open on top. So you could have a really short one. It's just really an alleyway. Okay? So let's say you had a 9 tefach high mavoi. Only 9 tefachim. So what are you going to do? You want to put a korah, so what you can do is you can dig another tefach into the ground to make an indent of a tefach. So that way you fill out to make it 10 tefachim by digging out. So the question is, kama chokek, how much do you have to dig? Kama chokek, kama de tzarich le. Again, same answer. How much? Why are you asking me how much you need? If it's 9 tefachim, then you need 1 tefach more of depth. So why are you asking? The answer is again, no, we're asking the same thing, that moshcho bechama. How much does it have to be in length? How far back? In other words, does it just right under the korah? Same question as we had before. Is it just that right under the korah itself you need there to be a depth of 10 tefachim? But behind that you don't need? Or does there actually have to be into the mavoi an area that is 10 tefachim? That's the question. And if we can look again, they have nice pictures here that illustrate the idea. So here you see that we're talking about at the door of the mavoi. At the door you have an indent of which is the picture? Oh, up here. Where you need 10 tefachim, and you can see that it shows dirt because they dug into the ground right near the korah there, instead of being a stone floor. Now, the question is, how far back do you have to go into the mavoi? And again, we have Rav Yosef Amar Bedalid. This time, Rav Yosef agrees and says, you're right, you need 4 tefachim this time. You need to go back 4 tefachim. Abaye his student says, no, but arba amot. You need 4 amot. Wow. So this time, so again, they're disagreeing with Abaye being more stringent. But this time, it's a matter of 4 tefachim versus 4 amot, which is a pretty significant difference. 4 amot would be 24 tefachim, pretty much, according to the way that we measure. If we're measuring it by the 6 tefach amah, right? So we're talking about 24 versus 4 tefachim, according to Rav Yosef. That's all you need is a 4. You need a 4 tefach area that is at least 10 tefachim in depth. Okay, in height.
Stand in it? I mean, you certainly couldn't.
You could stand in 4 tefachim. Yeah, well, nobody's saying 1 here. Everybody's saying at least 4. At least 4, maybe 4 amot according to Abaye. So lema kid bid Rabbi Ami Rabbi Yasei kami palkei. Now again, we have to understand what is the dispute based upon. So one possibility is that they're disputing that which Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi said to Itmar, as it was stated, mavoi shenifratz mitzido klape rosho, that if you have a situation where a mavoi was broken through towards the head of it. So itmar mishmei Rabbi Ami Rabbi Asi yesh sham pas daled matir bapirtza ad eser v'im lav bachot mishlosha matir shlosha eno matir. So what does it mean? So now here it's extremely helpful again to look at this illustration. I'm really happy that I bring this Gemara every day because these illustrations are quite helpful. Now in order to to visualize what we're talking about, what we are speaking about here is a situation where this mavoi is broken through. So you can see it's broken through towards the head of it. See, this is the actual door, but the side is broken through. So the side is broken through. Now if there is a piece here, right next to where the korah is resting, that's at least 4 tefachim.
Back.
So, in other words, the part at the very end of the mavoi where you're going to rest the crossbeam is at least 4 tefachim. So even though there's a big space here, it could be up to 10 amot of a space. Okay? But if it is not, in other words, if this is not here, if you don't have a 4 tefach piece right here, then even a small breach of 3 tefachim is going to break the whole thing. Is going to ruin the whole thing. Okay, so that's what they're talking about.
So that's where they get it.
Right. So that's what that might be what they're discussing here. So that's what it means. So when it says im yesham pas daled, if you have a 4 tefach piece on which the crossbeam is resting. So you have the two sides that the crossbeam is on. This side the wall is complete, this side the wall is broken, but at least the last 4 tefachim are still intact, and the space there is less than 10 amot, so you're still okay. However, if you don't have that piece immediately under the crossbeam, okay, then even if it's 3 tefachim broken on the wall, it's no good. Because the crossbeam is resting on, let's say, a 1 tefach piece, and then even if there's only a 3 tefachim break, it's ruined. There has to be at least a solid 4 tefachim underneath the crossbeam on that side. And then, even if you had a big break in the wall, it would be okay. It would still be considered intact. Okay, so now, so Rav Yosef laid the Rabbi Ami. So it seems like Rav Yosef, where is he getting the idea that 4 tefachim is enough? From this case. Because what do you see? You see that what do you need? On that side, you need 4 tefachim, a piece that's 4 tefachim intact, underneath the crossbeam, holding up the crossbeam on one side. Even if a lot of that wall is broken, it doesn't matter. You have the 4 tefach piece underneath the crossbeam of the wall still intact, you're good. So too, when you want to determine how much space has to be the requisite measurement, 4 tefachim going back is enough to create a space that is 10 tefachim tall. It has to just be 4 tefachim going back. And Abaye does not hold of this. Abaye apparently would not agree. Abaye led Rabbi Ami. He wouldn't agree with Rabbi Ami. Okay? So now Amar Lach Abaye would disagree. He would say no. Arba amot. In other words, Hatam sof mavoy. Hachat achilat mavoy. I disagree. You know what? I could still hold like Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yassi. Why? Because you're comparing apples and oranges. You're comparing a case where the mavoy was broken. In other words, originally we had 3 intact walls, and now one of the walls was broken. And you're questioning how much has to be left on the wall for it still to be considered intact. And I'm saying, okay, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yassi are saying if you have 4 tefachim, it's enough. But we're discussing creating a mavoy. Because remember, this mavoy only has 9 tefachim in height. It never was a mavoy. How much of it do you need to dig to the requisite height in order to create a mavoy? He's saying, there I'm saying 4 amot, which is 24 tefachim. It's not enough to just have 4 tefachim. If it's broken and you want to know how much has to be left intact, that's a different story. Left intact is a different story. Okay? So that's what Abaye will tell you. If you don't have 4 amot, you can't create a mavoy. You can retain the status of a mavoy with at least a piece of 4 tefachim that's underneath the crossbeam. But you can't create a mavoy with less than 4 amot. That's what Rabbi says. And now he says, Amar Rabbi says, Mina Amina. Where do I get this from? The Tanya it says in the Braita. En mavoy nitar balechi v'korach yubatim v'chatzirot petuchin tocho. Because Abaye says, I'll show you a proof. It says that a mavoy is only called a mavoy if houses and chatzerot open into it. Meaning there have to be at least 2 courtyards. Because remember, this mavoy by definition is an alleyway that at least 2 courtyards open into it. Now, the opening of a courtyard is 4 tefachim wide, by the way. So the problem is, v'i bedalet, if you're telling me that the entire length of this mavoy is 4 tefachim, how are you going to find the case that you have 2 courtyards opening into the chatzer, into the mavoy, 1 on each side, if basically the entire mavoy is only 4 tefachim and the opening of the chatzer is 4 tefachim? It's going to be open. There's going to be nothing on the sides. So how could it be? So, and then he says, and maybe you'll tell me that this is a very wide mavoy. So we're talking about the length of it being at least 4 tefachim, right? But maybe it's wide. The length is only 4 tefachim, but it's very wide. And in the back, where it's very wide, let's say it's 20 amot wide. It's only 4 tefachim long, but it's 20 amot wide. So you could have two chatzerot entering from the back, which is because the back wall is actually 20 amot long, because it's 20 amot wide. It's only the side walls that are very short. But if that's the case, that's not going to work either. Because we learned, is what is the mavoy that we talk about, that we can use just a lechi on the end, or just a crossbeam to permit carrying in it. It has to be that the length is greater than the width. So if you're telling me that the length is 4 tefachim, that means that the width has to be a tiny bit less than that even. So certainly there's no wall here that's more than 4 tefachim. Because there's only 3 walls. 2 on the sides, 1 on the back. And if you're telling me that the length is 4 tefachim, so then where are you going to fit? And the back wall can't be more than 4 tefachim. So where are you going to exactly fit 2 entrances from 2 courtyards in such a tiny little alley? There's no possible way, and therefore it can't be an alley, and therefore I'm right, says Abaye. So for Rav Yosef, we'll tell you, Patachle bekeren zavit, that we're talking about openings on an angle. Now the way that you'll see openings on an angle, Rashi, there's actually a little diagram in the Rashi here, that it means that it actually comes like this. So true that there's only 4 tefachim here, and the doorway is 4 tefachim, but it's put on an angle. So you could actually have it angled on either side. Okay, so that there's an opening here and an opening here. It doesn't take up the entire wall, because there's still a piece here, and there's a piece here, and there's a piece here. But the opening of the chatzer is on an angle, so it doesn't take up the entire wall with its 4 tefachim of open space, but it does comprise a total of 4 tefachim. And we can look at the pretty color picture in the back to get an even more vivid understanding of what is being described in the Rashi. He has in the back here this is the example. The original thing that was rejected is the back wall having 2 doors open to it, right? That you have a back wall of a chatzer, but he said that doesn't work because it has to be that the width is the same as the length. Right here is where it's talking about on an angle that you have this tiny little alleyway here.
The opening.
Right? You have the alleyway is going to be really small. This is the opening from each of the respective courtyards, here and here. This is the mavoi. It's a really tiny mavoi. This is the wall 1 and wall 2. This is and the korah would be over here somewhere. It doesn't show it in the picture, but it would be a tiny little alleyway if that's the case, with mostly open space, but it would still have the form of an alleyway. That's what Rabbi Yosef is suggesting to salvage his idea that you could have a mavoi that's only 4 tefachim in length. So now the Gemara says, Amar Abaye says, I'm not going to buy this. Mina aminala. Where else can I show a proof that I'm correct? To Amar Rami Bar Chama, because Rami Bar Chama said, Amar Rav Huna said, Lechi abolet midofno shel mavoi pachot mi4 amot nidon mishum lechi. Ve'no tzarich lechi yachel hatiro. Dalid amot nidon mishum mavoi ve'tzarich lechi yachel hatiro. That if you have in a mavoi, you have on the 4th wall, so remember, 3 of them are enclosed, you have on the 4th wall something jutting out from the side. Now normally that would be your lechi, right? That would be your special addition that allows you to carry in the mavoi. But here we're talking about just a protrusion that was built into the wall. It wasn't specifically placed there as a lechi, it's just a protrusion. And this protrusion, if it's less than 4 amot, then it can serve as a lechi, even though it wasn't originally placed there to be a reminder. It juts out from the side, so it's enough. But if it's 4 amot in width, if it extends 4 amot into the airspace of the mavoi, so then you're dealing with a situation where that so-called protrusion is the size of the mavoi itself. And therefore, we don't look at it as a lechi anymore. We don't look at it as something which is an added entity. We look at it as, so to speak, an extension of the mavoi status itself. Now, this is the lechi habolet. This is what we're talking about here. Now, in other words, you have the 3 walls. You have the 3 walls, and then you have on the 4th wall this jutting out. So if this is jutting out, over here. If this is jutting out, okay? This is lechi abolet. This is sticking out. So you have 1 wall, 2 wall, the back, and then you have it sticking out on the side. Now, if it's 4 amot in width, it's just considered an extension of the wall. It's not considered a protrusion, so you need to put another lechi on the side. If it's less than 4 amot, then it itself could be like the lechi. You wouldn't need the extra lechi on the side. Now, what do you see from that? Says Abaye. Abaye says, you see from that 4 amot equals mavoi. When it has the width of 4 amot, that it's protruding 4 amot, it's treated like the mavoi. Why? Because the mavoi has to be at least 4 amot. There you go. I proved my case, right? That's what Abaye says. So now, what do they say? V'Rav Yosef you can't compare the 2 cases, because what are we talking about in that case? We're talking about at what point is it too big to be a lechi. Here we're talking about at what point is it big enough to be a mavoi. 2 different things. Okay, just because 4 amot in width is too big to be considered a protrusion that's going to remind people not to carry outside into the Rishut Harabim, that doesn't mean that that's the minimum size that is necessary for the length of an alleyway. It could be that a length of an alleyway could be just 4 tefachim. So you're comparing apples and oranges here. One question is, what's the minimum length of an alleyway to qualify for any of these halachot? The other question is, what's the maximum length of a lechi that it looks still like something unusual and not just a piece of the wall? And that is a totally different question. And therefore we leave this unresolved, basically. So Rav Yosef and Abaye argue about this case. The halacha follows Abaye here that it needs to the mavoy has to be at least 4 amot in length. But the fact is that they each defend their positions in the Gemara. Now we go back to what we said before. Gufa Amar Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama said that Amar Rav Huna said Lechi abolet midofno shel mavoy. If you have this case where you have on the 4th wall a protrusion from the wall itself, pachot me'arba amot nidon mishum lechi ve'en tzarich lechi achel latiro. Daled amot nidon mishum mavoy ve'tzarich lechi achel latiro. That if it has 4 amot, in other words, if that 4th wall, the 4th side of the mavoy that would normally be totally open, where you would normally have the lechi placed, instead it has something that's bolet, it has a protrusion from the wall. If that protrusion protrudes 4 amot into the space of the doorway, then you need another lechi, because it's just considered an extension of the wall. It's just to say, the shape of the wall is a funny shape. It curves around. But it's not looked at as a protrusion anymore. So where do you put that lechi is the question. Oto lechi echan ma'amido. Where do you put it? If you just add it onto the protrusion, you're just adding to the protrusion. Right? Amar Rav Papa says the mokila li'idach kisa. You put it on the other side, and that was exactly the picture that I showed you before. That since you have this protrusion sticking out, what did they do? They placed it on the other side of the mavoy. So here is the protrusion that is basically treated like just an extension of the wall, and they put the lechi over here. The other logical possibility would be that you attach it to the protrusion itself. See, that's an example of attaching it to the protrusion itself. But what are you doing there? You're just adding to the protrusion. Right? You're just adding to the protrusion. That, Rav Papa is saying, is not the way you want to do it. You want to do it across from it, facing the protrusion. But the Gemara says, wait a second, that he says that no, actually Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yoshua, says you could add it to the protrusion. Dimitafebe or dimiftzarbe, and that's what I was just showing you. But you make it taller than the protrusion, or you make it shorter than the protrusion. Or Rashi says you make it thinner, or you make it fatter. In other words, you distinguish it. If you make it totally flush with the protrusion, so it's not nikar, it is not discernible. But if you make it either taller than the protrusion, or shorter, or wider, or thinner, so then it will be noticeable even though it's on the same side of the doorway as the protrusion, and you don't have to place it on the side facing the protrusion. Amar Rav Huna Brei Rav Yoshua said, Lo Amaran Ela B'Mavoy Shemona Aval B'Mavoy Shiv'a Nitar Be'Omed Merubeh Ala Parutz. This is a very interesting logic here. He says, all this that we just said about the protrusion of the wall, that's only when the mavoy is 8 amot in width. Because that means that how much of the width of the mavoy is being covered by the protrusion?
1 each, 2.
50%, right? Because it comes out 4 amot. Okay, but if the width of that mavoy were only 7 amot, then what happens? More than most, right? Most of it is already covered because you have 4 amot coming in and there's only 3 amot left. So the majority is actually enclosed now. Because remember, you have 3 walls enclosed, and then on the open side, the majority of the open side is closed because there's a protrusion of 4 amot, and you only have 3 amot left on that side. So you have a majority closed. He says that's called mirubeh ala parut. That omed, what's standing is mirubeh ala parut, is more than what's open. So v'kal v'chomer, it's a kal v'chomer. We can reason from the light to the heavy. Mechatzer, from the case of a courtyard. Umachatzer shina niteret belechi v'kora niteret ba'omed mirubeh ala parut. Mavoy shenitar belechi v'kora eno din shenitar ba'omed mirubeh ala parut. He says that when it comes to a courtyard is an enclosure that many houses open to. Okay? So there, let's say you had an enclosure like a big yard with multiple houses share the yard, and it's enclosed on only 3 sides, and it's open on the 4th side. You can't put just a lechi on one side, like you can do in an alley. You can't do that. Let's say the 4th side is open to a public domain. You can't just put lechi. You can't just put korah. You can either put a lechi and a korah. I'm sorry, you can either put 2 lechayim, you have to put 2, or you have to put a tzurat petach, you have to put a doorway there. You have to do something bigger to signify that it's an entry to the public domain. Okay? It's not enough to use just lechi. So what happens? But in that case, everybody agrees that, let's say you have a courtyard that on 3 sides is enclosed and the 4th side is mostly enclosed, so that the total perimeter is more than 50% enclosed. So then you're good. If the total perimeter is more than 50% enclosed, so that it's mostly enclosed, omed is mirubela parutz, there's more enclosed than open, so then you're good.
What do you mean?
Okay? Then you're considered enclosed for the chatzer.
Oh.
It's considered closed because the majority is enclosed, right? So if that's true about a chatzer, right? If in a chatzer, in other words, logic is like this: a chatzer is normally more stringent than a mavoi, because a mavoi, even though it's only enclosed on 3 sides, it's totally open on the 4th side, and all you need to do is put a stick there, and you're good. Okay, and it's easy. A chatzer is stricter if it's enclosed on only 3 sides. You need something bigger to signify that the 4th side is a doorway than just 1 stick. It's not enough. And yet, in a chatzer, even though it's stricter, if the majority is enclosed, if you were to have this case of having 3 walls and on the 4th side the majority was closed, it would certainly be good. It would certainly be good. So in a mavoi it should certainly be good. Because a mavoi is usually more lenient than a chatzer. A chatzer is usually more stringent than a mavoi, and yet, if the majority of that 4th side was closed, it would be fine. So too in a mavoi, if the majority of that 4th side is closed, because it's only 7 amot wide and you have a 4 amot protrusion, it should be good. That's what his logic is.
Okay with a chatzer if the opening is more than halfway
closed.
Closed. We're okay, meaning we don't have to have any sign that you're going.
You wouldn't have to have any other sign there, right?
No sign at all.
Right. You would still need eruvei chatzerot to allow people to carry in a shared area, but it would be enclosed. Yeah. So now what does he say? So he answers him, well, ma lechatzer, that's not such a tight kal v'chomer there. I can argue against it. Why? Because shekein pirtzatak be'eser tomar b'mavui shepirtzato ba'arba. It should be ba'arba'ah. That you can't compare, because you know what? It's true that in some respects a chatzer is more stringent than a mavoi, but there are some ways in which a mavoi is more stringent than a chatzer. Namely, what is considered a pirtza? What is considered a breakage in the wall of a courtyard? It has to be more than 10 amot of a pirtza, more than 10 amot of a breach in the wall to break the wall. In a mavoi, all you need is 4 tefachim of a break in the wall for it to be broken. So in that way, a mavoi is more stringent. So if we find that it's more stringent in that respect, that what's considered a breach is more stringent, so maybe we should also say that maybe being enclosed, maybe the fact that the majority of the 4th wall is enclosed is not enough. Because maybe we're more stringent about that too. And even though that might work for a chatzer, it won't work for a mavoi. So the Gemara answers no. Kasafar Rav Huna brei Rav Yoshua mavoi nami pirtzato ba'eser. That Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, also holds that with a mavoi, a breach is not a breach unless it's 10 amot. So since he holds that that it's equal, in other words, according to Rav Huna brei Rav Yoshua, in all respects, mavoi and chatzer are equal, except for the stringency of chatzer. That a chatzer's 4th wall has to be fixed in a more elaborate way than just putting a lechi. So if it's strict they're equal in all ways except for one stringency, so we should assume that overall chatzer is more stringent. And if the rule by a chatzer is that the 4th wall, the majority being enclosed, is enough, then here in an alley, the 4th wall being a majority enclosed should be enough as well. But the problem is that, wait a second, V'harav huna pirtzato b'dalid sevirale. But I'm sorry, I skipped the part. Leman kamrinan, who are we going like? LeRav Huna. This whole discussion is about Rav Huna. V'harav huna pirtzato b'dalid sevirale. There are 2 Rav Hunas here. There's Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, and there's regular Rav Huna. The original discussion here was based on the halacha of Rav Huna, that if you have a protrusion sticking out, you need, if it's 4 amot of a protrusion, it's considered an extension of the wall, and you need another lechi, another stick, to allow people to go through. And you came along and qualified that by saying that if that protrusion actually covers a majority of the wall, it's not a problem. You don't need anything. It's considered enclosed. So who are we trying to explain? The original halacha of Rav Huna. Rav Huna said that the protrusion is considered part of the wall. If it's 4 amot, you're coming along and saying but if the whole width was only 7 amot, then you wouldn't need any extra tikkun. You wouldn't need to fix it; it would be fine. But wait a second, and your argument is from the chatzer. You're saying because in a chatzer it would be good. But Rav Huna himself says that a mavoy is stricter than a chatzer. Rav Huna, you don't agree with it. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, holds that a mavoy and a chatzer are equal in every other respect. But Rav Huna, the original, who said this whole law about the protrusion, says that a mavoy that's broken even 4 tefachim is no good. And if the wall's broken even 4 tefachim, so he does hold that a mavoy is more stringent. So how can you say that mavoy and chatzer are equivalent? They're not equivalent. You can't reason from one to the other. So Rav Huna Breit Rav Yoshua says, no, that Rav Huna Breit Rav Yoshua Tamat de Nafshei Ka'amar. That Rav Huna Breit Rav Yoshua was saying his own halacha. He was saying, true, Rav Huna will not accept this, because Rav Huna will say a chatzer is stricter, a mavoy is stricter than a chatzer. And therefore, just because something works with a chatzer, having that 4th wall majority enclosed is good for a chatzer, it's not good for a mavoy. But we don't hold like that. We hold that they're equal in all respects. So just like a chatzer having its 4th wall enclosed for the most part is good enough, so too for a mavoy having the majority of its 4th wall enclosed is good enough. Rav Huna, the original, might not say that, but Rav Huna Breit Rav Yeshua is saying that. Now we say Rav Ashi says, Rav Ashi Amar, Afilu tema b'mavoy Shimona nami lo tzarich lechi. You know what? I'm going to take what Rav Huna Breit Rav Yeshua said a step even further. Even if the width of the mavoy is 8 amot, it works. Even though 4 amot is not the majority of 8, it's exactly 50-50 with 8, right? But it doesn't matter. Rashi explains that we can't be that precise when we measure things. We're not so precise. And so therefore we have the following issue. Manafshach. I omed nafish. If really this 4 amma protrusion is the majority of that space, because really that space, we haven't estimated it right, and it's really 4.05 amot, and it's really covering more than 50% of the space of the 8 amot of the width. So then it would be okay because the majority is enclosed. Because then you have nitan ve'omed mirobeh ala parutz ve'i parutz nafish. And if it happens to be that we are miscalculating the other way, and really the 4 amot are slightly less than 4 amot, so in that case, nidon mishum lechi, then it would be considered a lechi. It would be considered an addition on the side of the wall, and it wouldn't be considered a protrusion anymore. So, and then, my amrat deshavu tarvayu. So then what are you going to say? So what's the third possibility? There are 3 possibilities. Possibility 1 is that we miscalculated and really the protrusion is longer than we think, and really the area is closed more than 50%. The other possibility is really it's smaller than we think, and therefore it's not really 4 amot, and really then it's a lechi then. It's a lechi, it's no problem. It's just like any other stick that you put on the side of the wall. And what's the third possibility? My amrat, dishavu tarvayu kiadadi, that they're exactly, maybe it's exactly 4 amot, and the width of the mavoy is exactly 8. It's exactly 50%. Well, guess what? Then, havele safek divrehen. So then it's a safek dirabanan. 50-50 is a safek. It's a doubt. And we say, v'safek divrehen lehakel. And when you have a doubt in a rabbinic issue, we go leniently. So therefore, since the whole issue of carrying in a mavoy is only rabbinic, we're going to be lenient and allow you to carry. So Rav Ashi says that no matter how you slice it, basically, it turns out that you're going to either have the majority covered on the 4th wall, or it's going to be less than 4 amot, in which case it's considered like a stick on the end, which is good, or it's going to be considered 50-50, and then it's a safek at 50-50. We say, you can be lenient and carry in this mavoy. Now the question, of course, is raised, what about if the mavoy is much, much wider? So if it's much, much wider, so you can have a case where that doesn't qualify as a lechi, because it's too wide. Let's say it's more than 4 amot, the wide piece. the protrusion, but it definitely doesn't cover a majority. That's a different story. But when we're dealing with 8 amot in width, and we're dealing with a 4 amah protrusion, the 3 possibilities: either our measurements are not exact, one way or the other, and both ways work out fine, or they're exact, it's exactly aligned, and then we have a safek, we have a doubt, and in cases of doubt, we can rule leniently.